Yes, I am a humble student of medical ethics for a long, long time. My first introduction to medical ethics goes back to 1985 when I was invited by University of Shiraz to give a talk on medical ethics, and I had no idea. Nobody had taught us what medical ethics was all about. Going on to the topic today, it's called the virtuous physician. This is a term coined by Professor Dr. Edmund Pellegrino, who died in 2013. He was a philosopher, physician in America. So we're just see. I mean, everybody knows about morality. It's nothing new that what I'm going to talk about. What I would certainly like to talk about is the golden principles of morality and ethics. Now, morality is the guiding rule. It is the high altar where people sit and talk about the guiding rules and principles and try and tell us about the differences and the pathways and the delicacies of the rules that govern good and evil. Now, ethics is a branch of philosophy. Now, this is a quote that I borrowed from a book written by a very famous scholar a long time ago, which says that ethics is a branch of philosophy. Its other siblings are metaphysics, logic, aesthetics, and politics. Now, later on, people have tried to add religion to it, but that is not true. Religion, when you combine philosophy, becomes theosophy. So that's a different thing altogether. But metaphysics, yes, very important subject. Logic, aesthetics, and politics is the other components. Now, what is ethics? Ethics basically is the theories and the principles. It is a step lower than morality. Theories and practices that govern the attitude of a person to follow the right path. And of course, nothing new. We all know from our divine books and our parental teaching and everything. Now, bioethics, the term that came up only in 1980s or even early 90s, when they said that technology is advancing. So ethics applied to medicine and technology is called bioethics. It also expands various fields of medicine, not just healthcare, but also research and other activities. Now, Islamic principles on bioethics, or not bioethics, ethics are very simple. They're given in the Holy Book and Quran, and they are taqreen, it's respect, dignity, human dignity. Bir is very difficult to define. I remember Dr. Zaki Hassan has written a full chapter in our book on bir. Bir is much more than just beneficence or welfare. It is a very vast subject. Adl, of course, adl is justice, and justice doesn't have only one explanation. It has many delicacies and undertones that I'll try to cover a little bit. And of course, ihsan. Ihsan is the final. Justice is the prime. Justice, in fact, is the founding brick of all ethical principles, religious or secular. And this is a famous quote from the Arabic literature, la darar or fi la darar. That means one must not harm himself or bring harm to others. Of course, in Christianity, also in Bible, we see that do no harm to others, do to others what you would expect others to do to you. The Noble Quran is the companion, the full mandate is on being virtuous. But Surah Luqman, I've chosen particularly these verses, 16 to 19, where it highlights the fundamental principle of ethics as Amr bil Maruf wa Nahi anil Munkar. Now, I've done a lot of research on the translations, and Quran cannot be translated. But of course, transliterations that are available, I've checked several. Dr. Abdullah Yusuf, he was one of the founding, and he really wrote beautifully and translated as best he could. But my favorite is the one translated by Dr. Muhammad Asad. He was a German professor. And he says, Amr bil Maruf wa Nahi anil Munkar can be best translated. It's bid good, forbid evil. Bid good, forbid evil. That's the fundamentals. And then, of course, this famous letter, Imam Ali's will in Najil Balagha, which is worth reading. It's a dictate, it's a mandate, it's a direction that all of us should follow. It gives especially the directions to us following the right path and being virtuous. This is a quote that you can refer to things. Now, in the Western theories have been there for a long time. Deontology was the first one. Well, not exactly first, but it was the one that came into on the horizon much before the other theories. It is duty-based. It was written down or formulated by Immanuel Kant, and that's his date that I've given you. Then came utilitarianism, which has been there again for a long time, and they're controversial between the two. They never joined together. Like minds, brilliant people can never agree on a point. But Bentham, of course, and Mill, They consider quality of pleasure as well as the quantity, and this is the difference between the I mentioned here between the two. And then there's a virtue-based ethics, which is Platonic and Aristotle. Plato actually started, but Aristotle expanded over a period of time that he had more time to elaborate on delicacies of philosophy. What is virtue ethics? I'll go through it rapidly because I'll just try to cover in half an hour. Virtue theory is an approach that emphasizes on the character building of a person. It is not based on one act of goodness. That is deontology, which is based on act, duty, and act working together for a good cause, nor indeed consequentialism, which bases its decision on the consequences of an act that is carried out. So virtue ethics and virtue theory basically means they should build a sound character. That is exactly what the divine books have told us. Virtue is a habit. It emphasizes it. It should be emphasized, should be exposed instinctively, repeatedly, and regularly. For example, if you see somebody, a blind person crossing a road, everybody, a good Samaritan will stop and try to help this person cross the road. But that's only once in a while. But if you do it, if you build it as a part of your character and you do it every day, involuntarily, abruptly, it's built into your system, feeding a hungry cat or doing charity or doing good work, I mean, then it becomes a habit. And that is the objective of virtue ethics, that we try to inculcate virtuosity in the character and in the DNA of a person. It is the appropriate response to different situations, and different virtues are associated with feelings. They cannot come without feelings. So you feel emotionally entangled with certain acts, like feeding a hungry person, for example, or helping a blind person cross the road. The feeling of sympathy and feeling of association, engagement, involvement, compassion, and all those factors, they come in together in virtuosity, and you build a character. Virtue is also a mean between two extremes, because the right response to an act depends on your emotional involvement, your engagement, and that is important. And every act is measured and appropriate depending on the situation. And this is where I'll bring in Aristotle's quote in a minute. Plato gave us 4 cardinal rules: courage, compassion, phronesis, and justice. Now, of these, courage, compassion, everybody knows. Phronesis is something which is a Greek word for practical wisdom. Now, it's important that you have courage, you have compassion, but unless you have practical application, practical wisdom of applying virtuous activity or any act, whether it's virtuous or otherwise, practical wisdom teaches us as to how to act in the future. And it's a lesson that continues in your system and then improves the quality of work, your association, and whatever. And justice, of course, the pillar of all forms of ethics. And justice has been defined in different ways, but I don't have much time to discuss here. Now, the other reference that I'd like to quote here, that of course, Plato and Aristotle, they were a long time before, say, the Sajjad, who was a grandson of Imam Ali. He wrote a book called, it's a collection of sermons that you can read in this book called Sahifa Kamala. He has given several virtues, 12 to 14 virtues are defined in his book. In one particular lesson, it's called Dua Makarim al-Akhlaq, and I would encourage you all to read it. It talks that not just courage and compassion, but piety, honesty, truth, loyalty, kindness, generosity, and above all, hukukul ibad and hukukul-Allah. These are all virtues that everybody should get engaged into and imbibe them into the system. Now, this is what I'm referring to about Aristotle. Golden mean is a virtue that lies, and it's a mean because it involves displaying the mean amount of emotion, which where mean stands for appropriate. An appropriate activity, you expose emotionally much too much or far less, that is not appropriate exposure or display of emotion in a given situation, like generosity or whatever. And I'll give you a mean from a quote from the book that I have on my side here. The mean amount is neither too much nor too little, and is sensitive to the requirements of the person and the situation. And this is very aptly, it applies to the NHS in the UK, where everybody demands everything, but you have to make a judgment as to what is appropriate for a given person under circumstances and limited resources and what have you. That's a subject in its own right. Now, courage is associated with fear and is opposite of cowardice. Generosity, compared with, these are two extremes. generosity against miserliness, modesty was, and I'd like to bring, if you give me 30 seconds to quote from this book, I'd like to read it because I enjoy reading so much that I'd like you to share with me. Now, this is a quote from this book that I just showed you. Aristotle has written, the courage is a mean between cowardice and rashness, liberality between prodigality and meanness, proper pride between vanity and humility, ready wit between buffoonery and boorishness, modesty between bashfulness and shamelessness, and so on. So the important thing about virtue is that you must realize that it should be balanced between the two acts, and not just virtues. Everything in life must be balanced. Mean, mayana is the right way. That is exactly what the objective is. And I'll just go on. Justice, of course, is the founding brick of all ethical theories, secular or religious. In healthcare, it has three components: distributive justice, retributive justice, and restorative justice. And I've written extensively on this in the books that I've published on medical ethics, and perhaps you can refer to them later on. This is what I said, Phronesis is a new terminology. To me, it was a new terminology, but I read through it and I found that practical wisdom is the best explanation, definition, translation of the word phronesis. It means that you have to learn from every time you learn, that goes into your system to absorb, to act, and use it as a springboard for the next action. And that practical wisdom is a part of virtuosity. The entire objective of all ethical theories is to give good life, and virtue ethics aims at achieving happiness. And when you achieve happiness to the ultimate satisfaction of your heart, that is what virtue ethics says. That state is called eudaimonia. It can be only translated in Urdu as in fact Persian, as itminan-e-qalb, contentment of heart. Itminan-e-qalb or eudaimonia is the objective that one should achieve through virtue ethics. And these are the questions that you always ask yourself: how should I live? What is a good life? What are the proper family and social values? All these things are familiar to us from our parental guidance and from our religious activities. But even for secular people, I mean, I have a friend who's a very learned scholar, a non-believer in religion, but when you discuss these things are things that are universal. So actually, I'm a believer that ethics is a universal thing. We just give it cultural variants depending on the culture, also religious aspect depending on beliefs. Now, these are the famous Western philosophers that I've used in my books, and I continue to write about them. Some of them are new to you, some you might know. I give the strongest credit to McIntyre, what is his name? Alistair McIntyre. He revived virtue ethics in the 20th century after it had died down for almost 2 millennia after Plato and Aristotle. And of course, the current very, very important philosopher is Rosalind Hursthouse, who again says that good human being is a person who's virtuous, and all physicians should be good human beings. He's my guru, Edmund Pellegrino. And as a quote from his saying, that medical profession is losing its commitment to character traits requisite for the protection of the welfare and interests of patients. That is the whole objective, that the medical profession is losing its dignity because we're not ethical, we're not morally correct, and we have to bring a moral compass, as Dee and I'll talk about that in a moment. The decline and fall of the profession is now obvious. A patient has become a client. A physician is called a health worker, at least in the UK, I'm sure in Pakistan and Iraq and everywhere, Iran as well. And now we draw a contract between the services that I mentioned. Therefore, you have to mention everything good, the bad, and the evil. And you talk about the complications, etc. And you have to document them. Document is important. Litigations has become such a common thing, which never existed before. Loyalty is lost. Quality service with the finest equipment is more trustworthy than the human touch, which is good. We should harness technology, but let the human touch remain supreme. And the crisis in professionalism has resulted in the breach of faith. Doctors are not trusted like they used to be. That paternalistic approach is all but gone. We also see that in the ancient, antiquated traditional medicine, we saw that it was all said that Tabib is a good-natured person. And when Tabib is good-natured, half the illness was gone. Abraham Flexner changed a lot of things in medical education. He was hired by Carnegie, Edward Carnegie, I think towards the end of the 19th century. And he published a book, or rather a report called Flexner Report, which revived, organized, disciplined medical education per se. It's a famous report, Flexner Report of 1910. Before that, there was no orderly medical education, curriculum, syllabus, teaching strategy, assessment, evaluation. These were unknown things. Now, what happened was that was a time when typhus, typhoid, cholera, measles, smallpox, they were prevalent. And therefore, he produced a curriculum which is based on sciences. A doctor had to be a multitasking person. He had to be a physician or a surgeon, a gynecologist, obstetrician, or what have you. In the process, he lost humanities. And that is a sad thing, and I regret it. So he based his curriculum, which is called the traditional curriculum, that I learned through my teachers like Professor Wahid and Professor Afaq and all the professors. And I taught over the years. That is called traditional curriculum, which was sciences based. We never learned, we never taught humanities. Flexner introduced this curriculum, which is full, packed with sciences, but knowledge of humanities was lost in the process. We taught zoology and botany and what have you, but nothing about the touch of philosophy as to how should one react in a given situation like sadness, or bereavement, and what have you. Now, this is a new terminology which I learned only recently during the Sadiq International Virtual Webinars from Hasnan. He's one of the technical experts, and Mubashir Iftikhar, who's almost like right hand to us. That technogogy is the new terminology. Physicians should take the technology with open arms and engage it, embrace, imbibe it. But what is happening is that technology, particularly in the developing countries, is somehow depriving the human touch. There's no finger on the pulse, no stethoscope on the chest, no third finger. And Dr. Hassan Zaidi is my friend, is a surgeon. I was talking the other day that the palpation was the most important. You went into a cavity and palpated with your digital finger. That is why the surgeon's index finger was called the proverbial third eye, but that's gone. The digital, you can't even touch the patients. So medical sciences changed so much over the years. You can't do even a proper ward round in open environment because of confidentiality. So everything is changed and we have to adapt it. In fact, to use the right word, the moral compass was deranged. All these authorities, by the international authorities, state authorities, leaders, politicians, scientists, physicians, whoever, all of us, we didn't know where's north, south, east, or west, and we were just groping in the darkness. It resulted in several 100,000 deaths, morbidities, and of course, economic meltdown. Health professionals, I know from my personal experience, some of my friends, very close friend of my classmate, Habib Zaidi, actually died in the first week of January 2020. Another friend, a dental surgeon, he is still suffering with long COVID. So that was because nothing was available, because nobody knew what to say. Health professionals lost the desire to live, and they became suicidal. Now, there were some people who were conscientious, they were worried, and they were thinking all the time, and they were constantly trying to engage the people in the higher authority, people in the higher places, higher authorities. And one of them was Sir Michael Marmot. He is, I'll just talk to you in a minute. Sir Michael Marmot, I'll come back to in a minute. Now, the virtues that we saw during the pandemic were amazing things. That is what the positive aspect of COVID that I saw. I saw that people were courageous. I'm sure you must have seen in your country as well, that PPI was not available. Nobody knew how to protect. And yet they jumped into the burning fire to save mankind. I saw in pictures in Iraq and from Syria and Iran and Pakistan, of course, as well. And there were shared resources because services are limited, people have limited resources. So they maximize the benefits, particularly in Italy, using the theory of consequentialism and utility. You maximize the benefits for maximum happiness. Volunteership altruism was distributive justice was seen during this epidemic or pandemic. These are the good aspects that we saw. This is Sir Michael Marmot, and you should look up on the Google. Sir Michael Marmot has a curve called Marmot curve, which is world famous. He's a professor of epidemiology in the UK. He pointed out the social disparities which are responsible for all the crises that we saw during the pandemic and in various things. He's a strong believer that the wars that are thrusted in the developing countries by the powerful, the mighty Western powers, they are responsible for many of these disasters in the world because those resources could be channelized to healthcare. WHO doesn't get its share because the money goes away to wars, to Syria and to Iran and Iraq and Pakistan, and wherever. Now, he believes very strongly, and this is a quote from here, that authorities should be more honest, fair, transparent, equitable, and accountable. And you should read up Sir Michael Mahmoud's writings. He is a very famous person. For the past 50 years, he's been writing. He's he just retired from UCL. Then came the vaccines, and that was a disaster. First of all, people were against vaccine. Nobody knew what was happening. But when the vaccines came, the rich and the famous, the powerful people who own these vaccines, they jumped onto them. They grabbed them, took away. Majority of people, they vaccinated as fast as they could. And the poor nations, they were deprived. Even today in Asia and Africa, there are many countries who do not have. And then what was happening was that these anti-vaxxers came up. Some of them are famous role models that I cannot name on in public. And they influence a lot of, even now we see patients. I saw one patient day before yesterday where he said that he doesn't believe that vaccine works. There's nothing like COVID. There's nothing like that. There are non-believers. So where is the conscience of the rich and the famous people who guide to control the wealth of the world? Were they not concerned? My answer is the moral compass was deranged. Now, what I propose is, and this is what I did in a conference that we had recently in Iran, and I participated virtually, that we should design a new curriculum, post-COVID. And we should not call it post-COVID because COVID is here to stay. We should call it pan-COVID curriculum. COVID is going to stay. So we should design a new curriculum which engage preventive medicine, which used to be a part of curriculum when I was a student, then it lost its place to other more interesting subjects. If students should engage, they should not be left. It's not pedagogy anymore, it's andragogy, which Knowles came forward. He said the students should learn on their demand, learn through what they want to learn, not what you want to teach. You should not spoon feed. Andragogy is what you should try to inculcate in people's mind. And of course, heterogogy is a new word that's come up because now we have to learn to be lifelong learners. If you're not a lifelong learner, you cannot be a student, you cannot be a teacher. It is important that we remain totally committed to continuous reading and learning till the last day of our life. And I believe very strongly after discussion with the experts of the CV platform, Sadiq International Virtual University platform, that face-to-face is the best format, no doubt about that. But since it's not possible because of several reasons, what you can do is remote learning is here to stay, incorporated, learn the technology. E-learning is here to stay, and the beautiful discussion, Dr. Shirley Vidkali is a famous professor in Iran. She's written volumes on e-learning. You should read it through the webpage of Sadiq International Virtual University. It's volumes on e-learning. Hybridization is the best way forward. You have face-to-face, like in clinical teaching, and theoretical teaching should be all remotely. Now, this is what I have developed through my reading, etc., that what should be the attributes of a virtuous physician? In my view, just follow the teachings of Islam. Sirat al-Mustaqim, that is the intention. Surah Al-Hamd is full mandate on following the right path. You cannot go wrong if you're not. But then for people who are non-believing or people of other faiths, the golden rule of Aristotle can be followed. You should be soft-spoken, quiet and sedate, kind and generous, courageous but not heroic. Do not do all the way. Do not impress the people by heroic surgery when you know that it's futile. Futility of treatment is a very important factor. You should learn to live in solitude because solitude gives you an opportunity to meditate, to reflect on your thing. Reflective thinking is vital. You must learn from your own mistakes. Phronesis, practical wisdom, they all should be integrated into your character. You should be non-interfering. Nothing like Imam Ali was once asked, where have you found peace? He said, I found peace in keeping away from other people's affairs. Mind your own business. You should be a lifetime learner and should match skills, knowledge and skills, knowledge with skills, and should be moral and ethical. So take-home message from this talk is humanize medicine. Bring it back to the golden days of humanity being the fundamental principle of medical care. and produce virtuous physicians in your institutions. I'd like to thank you and encourage you to visit this website, www.sivu.alsadikuniversity.com. You'll find loads of material in it. Now we're in the process of writing 2 books. One book has already gone to Springer. It is on medical ethics and medical education combined together. And the second book, which we just completed, it's in the process of being released. It's an ebook only on medical ethics during the COVID years. Pan-COVID, Mubashir Iftkhar is working at the moment, and hopefully should be out there, about 40 odd chapters on different aspects of medical ethics seen during the pandemic of COVID, before and after. I'd encourage you to read it. I'm grateful to you for giving me an